Okay, if you want a cookie, this is the time to get it, okay?
That's kind of blinding.
Yeah, do you want me to
Are you okay? Do you,
I know it.
that's better. Yeah, that's much better. Not in the way so much.
Hi, I'm Charlie Kravitz. I'm the general manager of WBUR. Thank you all for coming. It's amazing if you put out ribs and cookies, what happens? Does anybody need to get anything now before we get going? There's still food back there if you haven't had dinner. I just wanted to say a quick hello, and then I'm going to pass this off, microphone off to Anthony Brooks. Just wanted to let you know just a little bit about the genesis of Generation Stuck. About a year ago, WBUR launched a big strategic plan called FutureCast. There's 4 posters in the back that describe the 4 parts of FutureCast, which we are using as our guidepost to kind of transform WBUR in the future into a multi-platform news organization. And as part of that, we created something called iLab, which some of you may have heard of, which is our place and organization within WBUR designed to create an innovation culture for WBUR, where we explore new ways to look at our world, to cover our community, to invent new programming, new digital multimedia forms of communication. And as part of iLab, we created our first internal fellowship, where we give employees at WBUR a chance to come up with fabulous ideas, because they're all very creative people. And then we pick one of them, and that person gets to take 3 months off from their regular job and work on a project that has kind of competed with others and emerged as a project we think is worth pursuing. And this Generation Stuck is the first of those projects out of iLab. And I want to just say a quick hello and a thank you and an acknowledgement to 2 important people here who are in the back of the room. One is sitting in the corner, kind of, there he is, that's Nate Goldman. Nate is the person who came up with the idea for Generation Stuck. You will see that he is of this generation himself. And it was a brilliant idea and an important story that we wanted to tell. And he proposed that we tell this in this multi-media format. And the person who runs iLab and who is our innovation producer is Lisa Tobin. She's there in the back with, she just waved, and she's got the gray sweater on. And Lisa, frankly, and Nate should be up front here too, because the amazing amount of work and time and effort and creativity that went into this is entirely because of Nate and Lisa's work. And believe me, you don't do something like what you've seen here or heard without the incredible work ethic of both of these 2 people. So thank you both, Lisa and Nate, for your great work. Having said that, I'm going to turn this over to Anthony Brooks and let him introduce our guests. And I hope you find this useful and interesting. You come back often, as we have other projects that we will be doing through the iLab. And we all appreciate your being listeners and supporters of WBUR.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Anthony Brooks, co-host of Radio Boston here at WBUR, and I just wanted to second what Charlie said about the terrific work that Lisa and Nate did. Because of Nate's great idea, we produced 3, I thought, really great hours of Generation Stuck on Radio Boston, and we had all kinds of interesting conversations and phone calls and feedback, and This allows me just to say something really quickly about Radio Boston. We're all about building local community on the air, and sort of seeing you all here today is sort of a part of that. It's great to come out from behind the walls of the studio and actually see the community in real life, so thanks for coming out. So I'm going to introduce the folks who are up here on the stage. Oh, and before I go on, so we're probably going to spend, I don't know, depending on the time, maybe 20, 25 minutes talking to these folks I'm going to introduce in a moment, and then it's going to be your turn to ask questions about the important issues that involve this generation and moving forward. So let me introduce the folks I have on the stage. First, to my far right is Sam Mackin. He was one of our audio diarists from Lunenburg, Massachusetts. And for those of you who don't know, what we did is we gave Sam and Catherine Round, who is to his right. She's from, you're from the North Shore originally, right? Manchester by the Sea.
Yes.
So we gave them a quick sort of training lesson in how to operate audio equipment, and then they essentially kept an audio diary from which we built these radio pieces. And then we also interviewed them in various formats on both Morning Edition and Radio Boston. To my immediate right here is Sandy Maxon. She's a career coach and therapist, founder of What's Next Coaching and Consulting in Cambridge, and she works with many 20-somethings in that role, dealing with some of the psychological and economic issues faced by this, career issues faced by this generation, so we're going to be talking to her. And to her right is Jensen Arnett. He's a research professor of psychology at Clark University and co-author of When Will My Grown-Up Kids Grow Up? An advice book for parents of 18 to 29-year-olds that will be published in April. Do I have that right? Good. So we'll be bringing you into the conversation shortly. But let me do it this way. I want to just start with our audio diarists. And Catherine, let me start with you. When we first met you, you'd pretty much hit a wall. You'd hoped to pursue a career in global health, but you'd been working as a bartender for 4 years since graduating from Tufts. And at that time, you'd been basically applying nonstop for jobs, interview after interview, and the only ones that you were able to find were in the food industry. And shortly after we began this project with you, you gave notice at the bar where you were working, moved back in with your parents. So we want to play briefly a cut of tape from last fall from Catherine Round. Let's listen.
I interview consistently, and the frustrating thing is that after you, I guess, get to the end of the line and they inform you that you didn't get the position for whatever reason, I always follow up and I ask, well, you know, why did I not get the job? And I have gotten so many conflicting answers that I don't really know how to make sense of it. I've been told alternatively that I have too much experience and that I don't have enough. So don't really know where to go from there.
So that's Catherine. We're interested to hear what you've been doing since then. But before we get to that, let me introduce Sam Mackin. When we met Sam, his job was to work as a journalist. I mean, his dream was to work as a journalist. Like Kat, he worked hard to find work, but like Kat, ended up working in a restaurant out, and I called you Kat, and we were just talking about how we weren't going to do that.
Okay,
I'm not Tony, and you're not Kat. She's Catherine. Okay, thanks. Sorry. Like Catherine, she ended up working in a restaurant. He originally moved home to pay off his debts and figure out what to do next, but wasn't able to land a job. So let's listen to a cut from Sam's audio diary recorded last fall.
I'm most concerned about being stuck in this kind of limbo for years. People just assume that, you know, well, this guy messed his life up or something, and it's like, no, man. I did everything right. I did everything everybody told me I was supposed to do, and I still ended up here, so.
So there's Sam Mackin. So Catherine Round, let me come to you. The last time I spoke to you was on Radio Boston. You actually had just landed a position with AmeriCorps, a kind of paid volunteer position down in New Orleans, right? Give us a sense of sort of what led to that path and how that worked out, how that's working out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still there right now. I mean, I'm just visiting for a couple days. That path came about because, as Anthony said, I had hit a wall and I really didn't know what else to do. I felt like every day was another day where I was losing the potential for, I guess, more experience and making me therefore less desirable as a candidate. The more I was a bartender, the less I was a professional. So I decided I need to do something a little bit dramatic. And so I knew I wanted to get involved with global health, or at least public health, start on a domestic level. And, you know, this really seemed like the only opportunity that I could really do. And when he says it's a paid position, I am stipended, I am on food stamps, and I am very, very careful with my money, and I bicycle a lot. So I find ways to make it work, and it's really a fun city, and it's a good opportunity, but I'm not going to say that it's necessarily for everybody, because it does require a lot of adaptability and a lot of determination, I think. But for me, it was the best option that I had. You know, it was either that or move home for the second time. So I decided to jump. And I'm glad I did.
Catherine, tell us what you can about why you're in Boston now, besides to be participating in this terrific event.
Sure. I actually was flown out here for an interview. Thank you. Thank you. Right, and I love those interviews, let me tell you. I am evidently not very good at them, but definitely good at running them. So I was actually flown out and for a position in Cambridge, doing really work that is very germane to my interests. And fittingly enough, the reason that I was flown out is because the wife of the president of this organization heard my story on WBUR and told him you needed to contact that girl. And he found me at the health center I work at in Louisiana and contacted me, and here I am now. So, yeah, thanks, WBUR.
Well, can we ask?
It's gotta be an easier way.
It's gotta
I kid you not, it's insane.
Can you give us a sense of how the interview went, how you feel about it?
Well, I feel very good about it. I often feel good about interviews. Maybe my intuition is a little off, but I do feel very, very good about this interview. So,
All right. Well,
so.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
and we wish you the best with that.
Thank you.
So, Sam, let me come over to you. Give us a quick update on your situation since we heard that piece of tape from last fall. What are you up to now? What are your hopes?
Since I completed the story, not a whole lot's changed. I've switched from just generally looking at jobs to specifically trying to find a federal job, because I figured that, well, this was before the, anyway. It seemed like a good idea, and it seems like it's good. I have an uncle who's involved with the federal government, and he's told me for years that it's the best way to go. But the problem is I have a supreme lack of experience just professionally, and it really is a hindrance. Other than that, you know, I still work basically full time at the restaurant, and I'm still looking for another gig.
One of the big themes in the diaries that came from both of you was the psychological impact, I guess, of living at home, of not having that job that you feel really expresses who you are. And I want to play another cut from you, Sam, from your diary, in which you talk about this specifically. So let's listen for a second.
Yeah, every now and again I get really depressed, and sometimes it's rough, and I don't know what to do with it. The thing that I find, it may not be cathartic, but what I've like find solace in is actually talking to my friends about it and realizing that I'm not some freak, you know, who somehow, you know, made some karmic mistake and is stuck here. That I'm not alone, and that I'm part of something that's just happening, and it's just an outcome of all of these really big things.
Sam, it seems like you're sort of describing a sort of psychological toll that comes from this, and is that something that is still a bit of a struggle for you?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about like going to an interview, after just having a string of unsuccessful interviews. You know, anytime I go to an interview now, I don't even bother getting my hopes up. Like a lot of these federal jobs I'll apply to, and it's just I apply and I couldn't even tell you what they are. I want a job, and I know that if I actually like put hope into it, that I'm just gonna, you know, that eventually just eats away at you over and over and over and over and over again.
Well, this is where we want to bring in our other two guests. I'm going to reintroduce them because that just seems like the courteous thing to do. Sandy Maxon, career coach and therapist, founder of What's Next Coaching and Consulting in Cambridge. Welcome and thanks for joining us. So we've heard two stories from two different people facing similar challenges around this broad theme of being stuck. What particular challenges is this generation dealing with, and what kind of psychological impact, for starters, are we talking about?
Sure. So if I can just correct a little bit of
Please.
the introduction. I was trained as a therapist. I'm no longer a therapist.
Just move the mic along.
Sure. I'm a career and leadership coach. I work with everybody who comes to me because of some aspect of their career. And at any one time, I have anywhere from a third to a half of my clients who are 20 to early 30-somethings. So I've worked with a lot of, over the last 7 years, I've worked with a lot of your generation. So I'm not sure that I am the person to speak to about the larger issues, but I can absolutely speak to the people that I see and the people that I talk to who are in their 20s and early 30s. And so I see a lot of what you're talking about. I see the disillusionment, the defeat, the sense of defeat. When people first walk into my office, I see their battered self-esteem. It's hard, and what they often say is very similar to you. I don't know where else to turn. I've tried to do everything I know how to do, and I don't know what else to do. So one of the things that I think is really important is that is also to recognize how many positives there are about this generation. And as a coach, what I try to do is to help my clients understand and be able to articulate what they can do, how innovative they are, how creative they are, because your generation is amazingly creative and smart. And so it's kind of changing the narrative from the defeat over to the how can I leverage my strengths, how can I present myself, how can I address a job search that's different from the job searches that maybe my older siblings were able to do, or certainly my parents. Because finding a job these days takes a different set of skills and a different set of actions. So
And how do you sum that up? I mean, what defines that different set of skills for this generation versus the previous generation?
I guess what I would say is in previous generations, or maybe older siblings, they could send out 10 resumes, get an interview, and get a job. And that just doesn't happen anymore. What people need to do is to make personal contacts, lots of them, lots of networking, lots of informational interviewing, lots of personal ways of getting into companies. And that's how people are getting jobs.
I like what you said about sort of recasting the way people are working hard to recast the way people feel about themselves. And it sort of got me thinking, as much as I liked the title of our series, Generation Stuck, after I spoke to more and more people like Catherine and Sam, I sort of wanted to call our series Generation Resilient. Because it's a tough world out there, and the conditions are a lot tougher, certainly for this group of people, than, for example, when I was coming into the workforce. So this is leading up to a question, and the question is this: do you buy the premise that this is a generation stuck?
I guess that's the part that I don't buy, or I don't want to frame it that way. I think it becomes a narrative in and of itself. It becomes a definition, and I don't think that's a healthy way to frame this time of life. The 20s have, being a 20-something has always been a hard time. It's a transitional time, and I think you'll probably talk more about that. But it's to frame it as something, to find a different narrative. Maybe the generative generation, or the resilient generation, because there's a tremendous amount of that. I agree.
Well, Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, let me come over to you. Again, research professor of psychology at Clark University, co-author of When Will My Grown-Up Kids Grow Up, which is coming out in April. In your research, what do you see as the biggest barrier that's preventing some members of this generation from taking off?
The biggest barrier is lack of education, believe it or not. This is the most educated generation of young people in history. But it's surprising how many of them still don't have much education. What would you guess is the proportion of 25 to 29-year-olds who have a college degree? Think about it for a moment. We were talking about this in the room before we came on, which is why I'm asking you, because they were very surprised to learn that it's 29%. Now, those of you who are college educators are probably especially shocked at that, because those of us who have a college education tend to hang around other people who have one and tend to assume that, well, pretty much everybody has one. Everybody doesn't have one. It's still the elite, really. It's still a minority of Americans who are 25 to 29 who have one. Now, it's larger than ever before. It's certainly larger than it was 10 or 20 years ago. But most people still don't have one. And those are the ones who really struggle. With all due respect to Sam and Catherine, they've got it made. It doesn't feel that way now, but in the long run, the payoff for a college degree is $1 million over the course of a lifetime. That's a sort of rough estimate according to a variety of different measurements. $1 million. That's how much more you will make with a college degree than if you don't have one. Also, at this age when people are first moving into the job market, young people with a college degree have an unemployment rate that's half the unemployment rate for those who don't have a college degree. So as a society, I think we need to invest more in giving people more of an opportunity to get a college degree. It is getting more and more expensive. It's grown much more expensive over the course of the last 40 years. It's grown 4 times faster than the rate of inflation. And so people are daunted by it now, even though there are a lot of good opportunities to get an education at a community college or a state university that's relatively inexpensive. But there are a lot of people who feel like that's a barrier to them getting the education they want. I just directed a national survey at Clark University called the Clark University Poll of Emerging Adults. And the proportion who said they were not able to get all the education that they wanted for financial reasons was over half. And it was especially high among African Americans and Latinos. It was especially high among emerging adults who were from poor backgrounds. So I think that's something that's really missing. The economy has become more and more an information and technology economy. And we're not really doing enough as a society to prepare people for it.
And you're talking about the importance of a college degree. Both Catherine and Sam, of course, as you pointed out, have college degrees. So have we moved into that place where it's not just a college degree that people need to have, it's a particular kind of college degree?
Well, the more education you have, the better. I mean, a master's degree pays off even more, and a PhD or other professional degree. All of them pay off over time, statistically. That doesn't mean they do for every individual.
But I guess I'm asking about
statistically, they do for everybody.
A particular field of study. I mean, again, when I remember back in the day when I was at college, it was sort of like, just get your degree. It almost didn't matter what you studied. And I'm getting the sense that it matters now.
Well, it probably has always mattered. And now it certainly matters. If you get a liberal arts degree, that's worth less in the job market than an engineering degree. And there are certain degrees, like a psychology degree, for example, that as a bachelor's degree won't get you very far. You really have to have a master's and preferably a PhD. So it very much depends on the field. But yeah, there definitely is a difference in the payoff depending on what field you're in. But the important thing is to get a college education. The credential matters. What people end up doing in the workplace is often light years away from what they got their degree in, but they still have a leg up in the competition for those jobs, even though the actual job may not be in the field they studied and prepared themselves for.
Sandy, do you want to chime in on this issue around the college degree?
Sure. I think I agree with you that an engineering degree, I think, makes the way easier. I think a liberal arts education is still a very viable thing to have, an important thing to have. And it's then what you decide to do with that. So one of the things that I think is really important is to begin to define yourself, to declare your own definition of who you are and what it is that is most important to you and what you want to pursue. And then, yes, you may need a graduate degree or further education, but there is so much, I think, later on in life, if you are thinking about changing careers, a liberal arts degree really does give you a huge base, a huge foundation from which to move into other things. Because we tend not to have, most people don't have the same career in their 20s or 30s that they do in their 50s.
Let me bring up another theme that both Catherine and Sam, that came out of their audio diary, and that is this idea of moving back home and the impact that that has on sort of the sense of who they are. And I want to play another audio clip. This is from Catherine, who actually used this moment in her audio diary to interview her parents about her situation. So let's listen.
Do you think that in all those years that there's something that maybe I should have done differently?
Well, you know what I've just got to discover recently, that you have been on a very normal trend. I've been talking to so many people and their kids are in the same situation.
This is the new normal.
That's right.
This is the new normal. Jeffrey, is this the new normal? The situation that was just described there?
It's the new normal, but it's not as new as you might think. It's actually held pretty steady at about 40% for the last 20 years, the proportion of young people who move back again after moving out. And you would think it would have gone way up in the course of the last 5 years because of the recession, but it hasn't. It's gone up, but very slightly. And I think the reason is, and I bet Catherine can speak to this, and maybe Sam, that most of them will try very hard not to have to move back home. It's not that they don't love mom and dad, it's that they don't want mom and dad in their business all the time. They don't want mom and dad knowing what time they came home last night or if they came home. They don't want mom and dad knowing how they spend their money, what little they have. They don't want mom and dad knowing that they slept in and got up at noon and lazed around all day on a given day, if that's what they did. They don't want their parents in their business, and they'll sacrifice a lot. They'll live at a much lower standard of living on their own in order to live on their own, if they at all can manage it. Now, if they have to move home, they generally get along pretty well with their parents. The Pew Foundation did a report last year that they called "Feeling Okay About Living with Mom and Dad," because that was the main finding of it, is that those who were living at home were not crazy about the idea, but they weren't feeling terrible about it either. They generally get along pretty well with their parents.
Sam, I'd love to get your. I'll come back to you. I'd love to get your perspective, Sam, on what Jeffrey was just talking about there.
Living at home.
And bring that microphone up a little bit.
Sorry. Hello. I get along well with my parents, but yeah, like you said, it's having the ability to have your own space, which drives me crazy on a daily basis. And I mean, it's incentive to get going, and it's one of the reasons why I enjoy working, that I can go and I can work and I can make money. But yeah, I mean, I fantasize every day about having my own space, and it's like this dream. But it's definitely incentive, and it definitely bothers me on a daily basis.
Sure. And Catherine?
I
mean, I know you're not living at home now.
No, but I
how
have.
much was that an incentive, like rocket fuel, that drove you out of there? Or?
In a way, yes, actually, because my parents don't live very close to much. So you get bored pretty fast, and it's also kind of embarrassing to go to the grocery store and see the parents of all of the kids you went to school with, and they're like, what are you doing here? So that's really the rocket fuel, lit my butt, so to speak. But yeah, it's not terrible, and it's definitely provided me with a little bit more financial security to allow me to do something like AmeriCorps, for example. So that sort of is wonderful. But it definitely does make you feel like you're in a state of arrested development.
Yeah. Sandy, you wanted to say something about kids living at home, young
Yeah.
people living at home.
I was just going to say that I agree with the things that have been said. That's what what I see. But I think there's a silver lining to it, which is that I think that parents and adult kids can develop their adult relationship with each other and have been doing this. And one of the things I see is that there's an opportunity there that wouldn't ordinarily be there. I'm not saying that that's what we want to have. The kids don't want it. The parents probably don't want it. But there is a silver lining there.
I want to talk about another theme, or ask you all about another thing. When we were talking about this on Radio Boston, someone on one of our programs made the point that this generation is dealing with a set of expectations that might be unrealistic, in part because they are children of the baby boomers who set these very unrealistic expectations. This idea that if you work hard, if you go to college, if you work hard, you can pretty much get whatever you want. So there's sort of this natural disappointment that follows when that doesn't happen. And we did some polling on this. 90% of young people said hard work leads to success, but a majority of them hadn't yet found that success. So, Catherine, were millennials raised with false hopes, do you think?
That's kind of a tricky question. I don't think, I'm not going to say that we were raised with false hopes, because I don't think it should be false to hope that you can be successful. You have to have that. You have to have that hope. I do think that we have to be a lot more creative than the former generation. I think we have to be more entrepreneurial, and I think we have to be more adaptive. I don't think that you can just work hard and get a job and you'll have that job for, a prolonged period of time. I think that you have to be able to assess what your abilities are and assess what the available positions are and what you can do with them. You have to be creative, and sometimes it's really hard to adapt to that when you weren't raised thinking that you were going to have to.
Sandy? Same question to you.
Yeah, I think that's wise. You've gotten such wisdom.
They call it character, yeah.
As a baby boomer, I think that it's great to give kids high expectations, to give them the sense that they can do a lot with their lives. I think the thing that seems to be off is it takes some time from the time you launch till the time you can realize those expectations. And that I think that process of where you start and how hard it is to get started and the work that it takes to find a good job, get your foot in the door, work your way up, prove yourself, that's something that perhaps we didn't prepare our kids for.
Because we didn't have to. Yeah, I'm sorry,
Well,
go ahead.
I don't think they were raised with false hopes, but I think they were certainly raised with high hopes. They very much were raised to believe they could dream big and go after those dreams and make them come true. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that when that collides with the reality of the job market, there are some adjustments that have to take place. Emerging adults go into the job market hoping to find a job that's not only a job, it's a source of self-fulfillment. It's fun. It's something you look forward to doing every day. It's something that also does some good in the world. That's important to most of them as well. And that's great to go into the job market with that. I hope you find it. But those kinds of things are elusive. Employers don't wake up in the morning and say, whom can I fulfill today? They say, how can I get a person to do this job that I don't want to do for as little money as possible? So there's a disconnect in the workplace between what emerging adults are hoping to find and what employers are expecting to offer. And what I find, having interviewed people from 18 to 29, is that by the end of the 20s, most people make their peace with that. They start out shooting for the moon, and they end up at the end of their 20s usually not finding it, but still finding something that they can live with, finding something that's pretty good for now. And that's enough, at least for now. They're still hoping that it will develop into more, and maybe it will in the long run.
So we're going to take your questions in just a minute. I just have one more question, both for Sandy and Jeffrey. And Sandy, let me start with you. what's the most, sort of following on to what Jeffrey said, the most fundamental piece of advice that you give to a young person who comes to you struggling to find work, to find his or her way?
What I always say to people who come to me is the work that we start is to talk about who you are, not what you want to do, not what your skills are, not what your experience is, but who are you? And to help my clients be able to articulate that, and to be able to articulate it in a way that eventually they can combine it with their skills and experience and present themselves positively to an employer. But I think it has to start with who you are.
Jeffrey, do you agree with that?
Well, more or less. I guess my advice mainly would be get an education. It's more important than ever before to get an education, because the best jobs in the new economy require one. And even though that proportion who have one is higher than ever, most of the jobs that most of you would want are going to require you to have an education. So do what you can to get there. Do what you have to do to get there, even if it means taking out college loans that are an amount that's rather daunting when you're 21 or 22 or 23 years old. And the other piece of advice I would give to people is be patient. I know it's difficult, and I know it's stressful to be in your 20s and be out there and you're sending out resumes, you're not getting a job, or you're getting a job and losing one, even though you liked it. That's a stressful thing to go through, but that is now what's normal. And I've found that people take a great comfort from knowing what's normal now, from knowing that they're normal, experiencing the upheaval in their 20s that most people experience. That's why I wrote this book for parents, is because I've found so many times, speaking to public audiences, that parents take a lot of consolation, and so do emerging adults, from finding out that this is the new normal. The average number of job changes now from age 20 to 29, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, is 7. That means the average person is changing jobs almost every year for a decade. That's what's normal now. For college grads, it takes an average of 4 years after graduation to get their first long-term job that lasts for 5 years or more. For non-college grads, it takes even longer. For high school grads, it takes 6 years. For people who are high school dropouts, it takes 15 years. So the new normal is that there is a lot of instability in the 20s as people make their way into the job market. But almost everybody does find a stable job by the time they're about 30. So be patient and keep trying.
Well, with that great advice, do you have something?
I just want to say that I don't think it's unrealistic to be looking for something that is fulfilling. As much as you're absolutely right, employers are not getting up in the morning and thinking about how they can fulfill you. But I don't think it's unrealistic to look for and to shoot for a job that's going to be satisfying and fulfilling.
So this is your opportunity now. We want to throw it open to questions. You can call in, or you can just stand up and ask a question. We've got a microphone right there. Okay, great. So just put your hand up, and the microphone will come your way. Yes, sir, please.
Hi. I'd like to follow up on your comment about how individuals these days will change jobs almost every year. That may be a consequence of how also the economy and businesses behave, which is ultimately the reason I was in a situation where I had to get myself unstuck. I was that guy changing jobs every other year, but it's in part because companies these days have no interest in developing skills for the long term. They're looking for that ideal candidate that fits every single box on their online profile. And if it doesn't, they have thousands of others to choose from. And to some degree, that drove me. It can be also a drive for entrepreneurship, like Catherine was saying. You have to define yourself, and you have to define what you like, and then create a job that you can be happy doing. So I guess to some degree, the way the economy works has also influenced the way new emerging adults are finding jobs, and just not being able to find them because their requirements are too stringent.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I also think that employers will hire people who are useful to them, and they'll fire them when they're not useful anymore. I mean, we have a very open economy. Most European economies, once they hire somebody, people are very difficult to fire. That's why they're so reluctant to hire people. Here it's a much more open economy. Employers are quick to hire if they need labor, but they're just as quick to fire, and we don't have any laws that prevent employers from firing people the way most European countries do. So employers do what's in their interest. And younger workers, this is true now and it's always been true, they're worth the least. That's the hard truth. It's always hard to make your way into the labor market because you have the least skills and the least expertise of any other age group. Everybody above you knows more and has more experience. So young people are always the last to be hired and the first to be fired. And the unemployment rate for young people is always amazingly consistently about twice as high as it is for older workers for that reason.
Are there particular advantages that the younger worker, the younger applicant can bring? Let me ask you, Sandy.
They cost less.
Yeah, that's what I was,
Yeah,
that was on top of my list.
The other thing is that they're often energetic and want to get ahead and are willing to put in extra in order to do that. And I think employers recognize that when they see it, and they're very willing to help. If they can, they're very willing to help someone who's motivated and energetic and good at what they're doing to move ahead.
Next question. Where's the micro? There we go. Yes, sir.
Hey there. I had a question kind of regarding how, since the recession, obviously the unemployment rate has gone much higher, which means there's many more people with more experience competing for the same jobs that many people in our generation, maybe 10, 15 years ago, had a very good shot at, but now we're competing against people who know how to network, have done it for many years, and probably are much more qualified despite having lost their jobs. So my question is that realistic? Is that kind of, a problem that we can maybe fight, but as long as the unemployment rate's high, it's not going to go away anytime soon?
Well, I think that is the reality of it. I mean, you are competing against workers of other ages who know more than you do and who have more experience than you do. But you have the advantage of being cheaper, so that makes you attractive to hire. It's actually easier for younger workers to find another job than it is for workers who get laid off or fired in middle age or older. It's very hard for them to make it back in once they've been shoved out because they cost so much. And if somebody hires you to do a job a 50-year-old was doing, you might not do it as well for a while because you don't know as much. But you'd be a whole lot cheaper to hire. And so employers sometimes are willing to take that risk. They see a sharp, energetic, creative young person. They might hire that person and hope that person will stick around long enough to be a useful contributor to their business.
They can also mold, they think they can mold a younger person in the way that they would like. So that's attractive to them as well. And I just want to comment about older workers know how to network and have been doing it for a while. So my mantra is network. Learn how to network the hell out of your time, however you say that. And if you're not sure how to do that, go to your college career center, talk to people who've been networking, learn how to do that because it's a lifelong skill. You will get a job that way. That's how people are getting jobs, and it's a wonderful way to learn about your field and about the job market and get to know people.
So what's the number one networking tip that most people need to hear, or that a lot of people can hear?
Probably the number one thing is when you're networking to let the person that you're meeting with know that you're not going to be asking them for a job. So it's kind of ironic, but it's very important. When you're networking, people want to help you, and if you ask them for the job, they may not have one for you. But they do have information and knowledge about their company, about their industry, about themselves. So if you ask them for advice, most people want to give you advice, and most people want to help. And by doing that, you are you're getting to know them, you're forming relationships for the future, and you're also showing what you've got. So.
Next question, in the back, yes.
So I'm actually on the hiring side, and I came here to hire a lot of recent grads, and I came here to try to understand better, your side. But to piggyback on what Sandy just said, I think the other piece of good networking is to have a good elevator pitch. I meet a lot of people at networking events, and I need to walk away with a 30-second soundbite about you. And also when I interview people, my first question is, tell me about yourself. And they ramble on and on about their degrees, and by the time you get an interview, all I'm doing is I want to see if I want to work with you. I mean, if you came into the room to interview, I already established that you have the degree, that you have the experience, otherwise you wouldn't be in front of me. So I really just want to know if you're actually going to mesh with the organization, and if it's a networking event, you're right, don't ask for a job because that makes me uncomfortable, but I want to walk away knowing who you are. And then from the employer perspective too, to your point that Sandy made about patience, and I think you also made that point that, we hire folks who are coming fresh out of college, and then a year later are, setting up meetings to start negotiating their next raise or promotion after 1 year of being with the company. So to the point of a bit of patience, I think goes a long way. Like you said, put in the time, have a good attitude. But
Sounds like a lot of good advice there. Do we have, in the middle of the room here on the left side, next question.
Hi, I'm just have a question about prior job experience or lack of it, and how that translates to getting a job later. I currently have held no paying jobs. I've only had a couple of internships, some at nonprofits, some at the State House, and I'm currently starting my job search, and I was wondering, is my lack of having a typical high school job, such as working in an ice cream parlor, going to help or going to hinder me in any way in trying to get my first real job?
You want to start, Sandy?
Sure. The internships that you've done and the volunteer work that you've done are jobs and are valid jobs. And in fact, on your resume, you don't need to say these were not real jobs. These were unpaid and not real jobs. What you do is you say what you did and how they would lead you to be good at what the employer is asking for and how you bring value to the employer. So if your ice cream job would somehow bring value to the employer, then it's worth putting on there, or it's worth talking about. But if it isn't, if that's not going to bring value to that employer, then it really doesn't matter. What matters are the things that you've done that will bring value to the employer, and how you talk about that.
Jeffrey, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I would basically concur with that. I mean, an employer, try to think of it from their perspective. They want to know what you can bring to them, what you can offer to them in their business. And if the ice cream parlor job gave you skills that will help them in what they're trying to do, well, then it will be an advantage for you. But if not, then it won't. They would rather see something like an internship, even if it were unpaid, that was developing skills that they're going to be able to use.
Next question.
I was wondering if you could speak about managing parents' expectations. I'm here with my brother, and I graduated slightly before him, got a job, and now our parents are having a hard time understanding why it's so hard for him, even though he's working really hard.
Well, I would like to give you my personal permission to blame your parents for your high expectations, because the baby boomers invented the idea that work should be fun. Nobody ever thought so before. Work has been viewed as drudgery throughout the entirety of human history. And suddenly the baby boomers grew up in this new economy, the threshold of this new economy, and decided that they wanted to make work fun. Well, then they grew up and got into middle age, and they became parents of people like you, and they realized that that's really a bit of an optimistic goal for work to be fun. And so when their kids go into the workplace with that expectation and looking for a job that they're going to enjoy, it sometimes causes parents to tear their hair out. But I also think that parents are, I found, in interviewing a lot of parents from my book, parents are willing to be supportive as long as they feel like you have a plan. What really drives parents crazy is the kid who is in his or her 20s and not doing anything and seems just kind of defeated and depressed and, you know, doesn't want to go out and try anything or do anything. That's the one that's really tough to deal with, and you know, parents can't really do anything about it. But people who are really striving, even if it's being a bit overly optimistic, parents are usually willing to try to support them and try to encourage them as long as they feel like they're working in some systematic way toward trying to get to what they want.
Sandy, is there more to say about managing parents' expectations?
How do you manage your parents? I think that the job market has also changed. You were in the job market earlier, and your brother is trying to get into the job market, and it's a different time. The economy is different. So I think it's realistic for it would be good for parents to be realistic about how long it might take. But I do agree with Jeff that as long as there's some activity going on, I think you can ask parents to please give you some time.
Catherine, you know, I don't want to leave you guys out of the conversation, and please chime in if you want to, but I recall from one of your pieces an interesting back and forth you had with your father when you actually accepted the AmeriCorps job, right? And his line was, what? You're going to do what? And tell me why?
Oh my God. For how much? Yeah. His concern was that I would never make any money. But that's been since the day I was like, I want to be involved in nonprofits. He knew that. He knew that was coming. But his concern was that he thinks that it's just another thing for me to do before I start my career. Because I have had a bit of my father has called me a dilettante before. So a bit of a patchy history. And I claim full responsibility for every decision I made, but I made those decisions because there were no options presented to me that were better. So my logic in accepting, for example, this AmeriCorps position is that, yeah, it doesn't pay a lot and there's no guarantee of employment at the end. But at least I'm taking a step in the right direction. And that's what I thought I was doing every step along the way since I graduated in 2008. I mean, bartending may not be the right place to go if you want to be involved in public health. I'm sort of like feeding the system. But you know, like down the line, if I ever get that job, you know, I can say, hey, you know, I generated this. So I think that I took those opportunities because they afforded me, for example, the financial independence to be able to move out of the house and network with people and put myself out there and pursue something like AmeriCorps, you know, because I can now afford to live on that stipend because I chose these decisions. So, yeah.
Next question, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a lady.
I can see that.
I guess I was just a little frustrated to hear that old idiom, if you work hard and go to college, you can, you know, on and on. Because, and when you're saying that how valuable a college degree is, you know, working hard and going to college are not the same thing. And I feel like my friends right now that are the happiest either took time off before college, they went rambling, you know, they did one thing or another. My adult friends that are, you know, my parents' friends that are the happiest took time, they had a construction job, they were, you know, a bartender before they figured out what they wanted to do. And I think that a lot of the frustration in the stuck generation, quote unquote, is that we sometimes feel rushed into making these huge investments. And the reason that I say a lot of my friends that didn't go to college are the happiest is because they don't have the same debt that all of us do. And so, you know, I agree that you can't overvalue education. I don't agree that saying the most important thing that you can, you know, those are contradictory statements. But is there a part in your book that says don't push your kid into going to college before they're ready, or
Well,
is that not a thing?
there is actually a part in my book that advocates a gap year, or 2 or 3. I mean, having taught college students for the last 20 years, I think most freshmen come into the college system and they're not ready for the benefits of college. They spend most of it drinking and trying to get dates. And, you know, at $50,000 a year, it's places like Clark, that's an expensive way to spend that year. So I personally had a gap year way back when, and it was a great thing for me because I was mature enough to know how immature I was. And after that year, which I spent working as a musician, I went to college, and I was much more ready for it. And it's not just my experience, though. I've also lived in Europe for a while. My wife is Danish, and I spent a year in Denmark as a Fulbright scholar. And I interviewed a lot of young Danes. And in Denmark, as in most of Northern Europe, it's very typical to take a gap year or 2 or 3 before going to university or further education. And you could really see the difference in those students. They were so much more mature. They're so much more ready to learn. We really should do it more. Almost nobody does it. It's 2% is the most recent statistic I've seen of young people who take a gap year, plan a gap year, and then they go to college or university. And that's a mistake. People could really benefit from waiting a year or 2.
I think that's something that's that just hasn't changed. I took a gap year after my sophomore year, and I think you described it really well, Jeffrey. The first 2 years, I was just not ready to be in college, and I squandered those years. When I went back after a gap year, I just sort of lit fire and moved forward. Why is the number so low, 2%? Any idea?
I think that I'd be curious just to see hands. I think people take time off during college quite a bit. It may be just a semester, but you know, both of my kids took off a semester. I didn't because people didn't seem to do that as much when I was in college. But can we?
Sure, show of hands.
How many people went straight through? How many people did not go straight through 4 years and took some time off during college? Okay, it's fewer than I would have expected, but.
Well, let me give you a couple of statistics that I think are helpful here. First of all, it takes an average now of 5 to 6 years to get a 4-year degree. And that's for the ones who get one. This is here's another statistic, one that just came out. The percentage of people who enter a 4-year institution who have a degree 6 years later is 56%. It's barely over half. And then you're in real dire straits because you've paid this money, you've gone into debt for your college education, and then you don't have a degree. You don't get the benefits of it. So don't do that. If you're going to go, if you're going to make that investment, and it is very much an investment of your time and your money, and probably your parents' money too. I know you don't like to hear this so much because people are telling you to get an education, get an education, get an education. But get an education. Get that degree. Nothing will be more important for your long-term future than getting that degree. And your friends now who don't have one and say how happy they are, let's see how happy they are then in 10 or 20 or 30 years when they're making half or 1/3 of what you're making.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up, was you keep measuring the importance of the college degree in terms of money. Is there a metric that measures it in terms of happiness?
Yes, there is. In fact, there are metrics that measure it according to everything from political attitudes to identity development to moral development. I mean, there's a huge body of research on this. And I advocate it not only for the monetary benefits, but for the benefits that you get as a human being. I mean, for the way it informs your view of life, not just during those 4 years, but for the rest of your life. It's correlated with all good things in life. So again, get that degree, and as a society, we need to support people getting at the education that they want to get instead of making it dependent on how much money their parents happen to have or how much money they're able to get from some other source. We shouldn't do that. We're wasting a lot of human potential that way.
Yes, who's got the microphone? Ma'am.
Hello. Sort of on that note, I've had many conversations of late with my grandfather who he just kept going on and on about the greatness of the GI Bill and the fact that he got his undergrad paid for, his master's paid for, and essentially a down payment on a house because of 2 years in the Army because he was drafted, which, you know, nowadays doesn't really exist. And my brother's now ex-Navy and won't even have that same benefit as with the GI Bill. But my question is, it seems that the WBUR series has focused a lot on that, I don't want to call it failure to launch, but that initial struggle of finding your first job out of school. I'm on the older end of the spectrum, I'm 29, and there seems to be that second round of, okay, you got your first job, now what? Or you've got your second job, or in my case, you've been laid off twice, and you keep trying to start again. There's this reality of, okay, you just need to get the job, and then you've got the job, now you have to pay off all those student loans. Is anyone studying the economic ramifications of that, of, you know, you didn't start your job at 22 straight out of undergrad, you might not get that $1 million because you were bartending, and now you are owing more than your rent in student loans. And sort of the next area of stuck is that adult milestone. I know people who aren't getting married, they're not getting engaged, they're not having kids, they can't afford to buy a house because their house is going to Sally Mae. Is anyone looking at that kind of research or seeing what long-term economic impacts are going to be moving forward?
Well, here's a piece of news for you, and this might be the most important thing you hear, not just tonight, but like this year, especially for you young people. If you love Obama, here's another reason to love Obama. This is something that was passed last year that got virtually no attention, but it's really important for those of you who have college debt. A law was passed that sets the limit of your payback of that debt, assuming they're federally backed student loans and not from a private loaner. But if they're federally backed student loans, you now pay a set proportion of your take-home income. So no matter how big that is, it doesn't end up eating up all your paycheck. It's a set percentage. I can't remember if it's 10 or 15%, but it's a very low and manageable percentage. And then after 20 years, it disappears. The government eats the rest of it. It's an amazing bill. It's a great thing to do. It may be the best thing that happened in his 8 years, and virtually nobody knows about it. So if you have college debt, find out about it. Find out the details because it just recently got passed.
To expand upon that, that actually doesn't become active for most of us who already have the loans.
Oh, sorry.
It goes forward in 2014, so those of us who are already screwed are still screwed. The only option is if you do public service or work for a nonprofit for 10 years.
Okay.
If you do your 120 on-time payments, then it gets forgiven. But
Okay.
again, a lot of those benefits are great for our younger siblings who haven't yet graduated yet or haven't even gone to college.
You're right. Thank you for adding that. That's very important.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Quick two-part question on sources of jobs, because you haven't talked a lot about that part of it. Online sources, one thing, Monster, Craigslist, whatever. Tell me what you think about that part of it. And second, to Sam, who's been quiet for a while, so but I appreciate his thought about government jobs, and I wonder whether you've taken the civil service exam or anything like that, because there are many jobs you don't even know about, or a lot of people don't know about. So I wondered whether you would, but take it in whatever order. But sources of jobs is what I'm talking about.
Let's start with the sources. Sandy, let me start with you.
LinkedIn. I mean, everyone should have a LinkedIn site. Everyone should build up your connections. It doesn't really count until you have about 80 or 90 connections, and it doesn't really work for you until you have about 150 to 175. But make sure that your profile is really professional. Clean up all your social networking sites. Make sure they're professional. And LinkedIn is where recruiters it's what recruiters are using these days to find candidates.
And Sam, do you want to take the question about the government job?
Yeah, you mentioned Monster, LinkedIn. Craigslist I only do when I get really depressed and desperate because I get scared. But I have not done the civil civics exam. The majority of jobs that I have applied for actually have specific. They're not quite tests, but they're really they're very specific on what kind of experience you have, where you've been, what you've been doing, and they're kind of like tests. And the majority of it is online. It's usajobs.gov, and I applied for. I had to fax my a lot of it actually asked for my college transcripts, which I find weird, but I had to fax my college transcripts to the State Department like 2 weeks ago, and that was on top of, that was my resume, my college transcript. I'd already done I spent like a half hour doing this questionnaire that they have, which I guess is like an equivalent to some sort of test. So they have each job that I've done on the federal side has actually had its own set of criterion tests that I've done. But a lot of it is kind of shaming because I'm like, well, it's like, how much office experience do you have? And I'm like, well, I got none, but I'm going to do this anyway.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'm on the older end of this. I'm 32. Maybe I'm not even in this anymore. But I've noticed just from 2005, 2006 that job searches is drastically different. I remember being able to put out, like she said, put out a resume, 10, so get a whole bunch of calls back. You got a job in a month, it's done. It's not like that anymore. And I've certainly switched jobs, obviously, since then, and found that I had to send out 200 resumes. And I'd also say back at that time, I know, a lot of my friends had degrees in, that liberal arts or, East Asian studies or, whatever, and now working in finance or whatever. I've worked in several different industries. Thankfully, I've always had a job, but I've worked in a lot of different industries, and it's kind of like you've got to be able to do that, and I guess in some ways realize you can't always, we get a job out the gate in what you studied or what you want. So just for you guys, I just want to say that, keep at it. But I also want to touch on what she had said, because I was thinking the same thing in terms of this generation and what's different with our parents. For a lot of our generation, that goal of getting out of college, getting a good job, getting married, having a family, or even just buying a house, whatever, is delayed. And I think it's been acknowledged in this conversation that you might be 30 plus before you kind of get that career, get that job. And that means that now some of the things that we've seen our parents do much earlier is delayed for us. And I kind of want to hear from Sam and Catherine on if that's something that you guys think about or your friends think about, and do you think that's part of this discussion?
Yeah, frankly, it's something I try not to think about. But when I do, I get a little panicky. So it's very true, because whereas before you would exit the gates and have yourself a job at 22, maybe be established, had been promoted by the time you're 25, get married at 26, couple kids by 27. That's being pushed back. I'm to be a little specific. I'm not saying that
You
that's
lost
something I wanted.
the 2 kids between age 26 and 27.
It's something that I planned and I didn't. It just happens. Hypothetically. So what I mean is now, whereas you might have had this, been married or whatever by the time you're 30, now you're not even starting until you're 30. I mean, I don't feel comfortable enough to pursue something that, permanent until I feel like I've established myself in a career. And specifically as a woman, because it's a little bit different down the line when you have your kids. And I know that, we're advancing as a culture in terms of the gender gap, but you're still going to be taken out of the workforce when you have children. So to not be established until you're in your 30s or later, it's something that's kind of, that this generation is certainly dealing with that's new for us.
Sam, your thoughts on that?
I was at a wedding. I had my oldest friend got married on New Year's, and I was sitting with a table of what are my oldest and closest friends, people that I've known since I was like 13, 14, and a lot of them now have been dating their significant other for a long time. We're at a wedding and we're talking, and each one's going, every now and again a guy would lean over and he's like, as soon as I get enough money together, I'm going to propose to Nicole, but, I got to wait until I finish my master's, and, we got to wait. And I know that, I mean, me, obviously, like having kids and getting married is not really on my horizon right now because I work in a restaurant. But I know that that's really the case for my friends that actually are, professional and are still making money, but are still kind of pseudo underemployed, or they're not making the amount of money that they would like to be comfortable enough to start a family and to get married. So yeah, from what I've seen from the ground in my little microcosm, that's definitely something that I've seen, and I know that a lot of my friends are doing.
Jeffrey.
I just want to add a few more statistics that you might find interesting. The median marriage age now for young women is 27. It's 29 for young men. It's the highest it's ever been. In 1960, it was 20 for women, 22 for young men. Can you imagine that? And it's still rising, and it's actually lower than in the U.S. than it is in most other industrialized countries. But almost everybody still does get married. It's still close to 90% who get married by age 40, and almost everybody does have at least one child, people who want to. So yeah, these things are later, but people still end up generally finding the kind of commitments that they want when they're ready to make them, and in the long run. Also, for people who are highly educated, like most of the people in this room, it's even later. It's in the early 30s, the median age of marriage and of having your first child. So it might seem late to you, and it is compared to your parents or grandparents, but it's not late compared to most young people today. Here's one other thing I want to say, because a lot of people have made some comments that the past was like a golden age, and boy, we're so deprived now because it's not 1990 or 1980 anymore. That was not the golden age. I was there. When I got out of college in 1980, the unemployment rate was 12%. So I don't want to minimize the struggles that young people have now, because it is tougher than maybe it was 5 or 6 years ago. But it could be a whole lot worse. And you still are people who have grown up in the most affluent country in human history at the most affluent time in its history. And so your opportunities are infinitely greater than about 98% of the human beings that have ever lived. So make the most of them.
I think we have time for one more question, and the microphone's over there.
This is more of a comment. I want to say to the young lady is worried about the push to go to college. You're actually doing the right thing, and just take your time, because this is where I disagree with some of the viewpoint, and I think the person who raised the question about it's not clear what the impact is. I don't think ever in history has students have been able to borrow so much money. And there's a real difference between if you come out of education and you only owe $20,000, you can view a salary. The median salary in Boston is $60,000. If 1 year of college is $50,000, multiplied by 5 years plus the extra time, that's not a realistic return on investment that is sustainable. And I just want to say, you're in Boston, where higher education is an industry. And so just understand the dynamics, because I think you've pointed out a lot about understanding what are employers looking for, but do your research about what are the regional economic drivers, and then talk with employers about what skills they're looking for, because there's a lot of middle skill jobs that are not being talked about. And those of you who have bachelors and you're thinking about getting a master's, think about going to a community college and pick up an associate's degree in computer programming or something like that. And with your bachelor's in liberal arts, you're much more marketable, I believe. But I'm not an employer, so I do think check that experience. But this idea that you have to get a master's at another $40,000 to $50,000 of debt, hold off on it, because you can always go for another master's and sign up for that debt. In another year, it'll still be there.
So before we close, can I, Sandy and Jeffrey, can I just sort of ask you each to leave us with a parting thought about all that has been said and exchanged tonight? Let me start with you, Sandy.
A lot of thoughts going through my mind listening to all of you, and there's a lot of things that I'm thinking of saying. I'll probably just say a couple of them. I think the debt issue is incredible. It's a huge issue, and if you guys were going to march on Washington, I would think that would be the issue that you should march on Washington about, because I think it's a national tragedy. I think it's much bigger than any one of us in the room or any one person's debt. So I think, so from an individual standpoint, the only thing you can do is to get yourself into a career and begin to pay that off. And hopefully there will be some help along the way in 20 years or whatever. So that's a real issue. I think finding, and I'm a baby boomer parent, and I do believe, and I'm a coach, and I do believe that finding a career or work that's satisfying to you, that you can enjoy, because you're there 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Eventually, to have that goal, to have something that you enjoy doing, that you feel is productive and meaningful. It's not going to be perfect, and it's certainly not going to be perfect every day, but I think it's a realistic goal, and I encourage you to figure out what's important to you, find a way to talk about that, network, get your elevator speech together, and present yourself, present who you are and what you do to as many people as possible, and go for it.
Jeffrey.
Well, one more statistic. Sorry, I can't resist. But so that you don't get too daunted by the fear of debt, the median amount of student debt for students graduating with a 4-year degree is $27,000. Now that seems like a lot when you're 22 or 23. I know. But that's the median, not if you went to MIT or Harvard or Clark for that matter. It's a lot more. But $1 million is the payoff over a lifetime if you have a 4-year degree. So it's absolutely worth the investment. The other thing I'd like to say is I've proposed that a good way to think about these years from 18 through the 20s is as a new life stage. People used to go from adolescence to a more or less settled young adulthood by the time they were 20, 21 years old. 50, 60 years ago, by that age, most people had finished their education, they were married or about to be married, they had had their first child or were about to. They had built the structure of an adult life. And now 30 is the new 20. And what happens in between is this new life stage of emerging adulthood that's not settled compared to where your parents and grandparents experienced those years. It's very unsettled and unstable. It's often confusing and stressful, although it can be really fun and exciting as well. But it's useful to think of it as a new life stage so that you don't fear the instability of it, and you don't think when you're going through this period where you're having a lot of difficulty finding a job, as Sam and Catherine have, even though you're trying your hardest, thinking that's going to last forever. It doesn't last forever for almost everybody. Unless you have a severe physical or mental disability, you will find your way. But during those years, it is now normal to be unstable and confused and stressed out and trying out different paths. And in many ways, that's a great thing. It's a product of an affluent society that can afford to wait for your labor until you really get into your late 20s and allow you to try out different possibilities in the hope of finding and making choices that will allow you to build a satisfying adult life. Just think of how much times have changed for women compared to 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, things have changed for young men, but for young women, it really has been revolutionary. Your grandmothers, those of you who are in your 20s now, didn't really have any options. They were wives and mothers, and for many of them, that was a great thing, as it was for my mom. She loved being a wife and mother, but that was it. Now you have this huge range of possible things you can do with your lives. And yes, it's stressful and difficult because there's so many choices, and it's so hard to navigate your way through that and find something that's satisfying. But I don't think any of us would want to go back to the old days when you didn't have the options. So we should support emerging adults more than we do, but I think we should go easier on them than we do. There are a lot of negative stereotypes about your generation, that you're lazy, that you're selfish, that you never want to grow up. None of those are true. And people who are my age should stop saying those things because life is tough enough for young people now. We should not make it tougher for them by ridiculing them and abusing them. We should give them more support. And for young people, I do understand. I've interviewed hundreds of 18 to 29-year-olds over the last 2 decades, and I know how stressful it can be. But I know, too, that it's a time of amazing optimism and amazing belief in the capacity that you have to eventually create the life that you want. And so there's that benefit to it too.
Well, that's a great optimistic note to end this session on. Jeffrey, Jensen Arnett, thank you very, very much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And hold your applause. And Sandy Maxim, thank you very much as well. And to Catherine and Sam, I just want to say thank you both and good luck, and stay in touch and let us know how it works out.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. Very quickly, at the back of the room, there's something from the Wellness Room in Newton, which is offering a sort of information and support group for the stuck generation moving out and into your future. It may be a resource that is of interest to folks in the room, so help yourself to one of those. And other than that, thank you so much for coming out.